So inflation is what everyone is talking about and talking about it really as a bad thing. But could inflation actually be a good thing? And is there a way that you can use it to your advantage? Well, my guest today, Jason Hartman, has something he calls inflation-induced debt destruction, which I think is an awesome way to use inflation to your advantage. So stay tuned. You're going to learn some awesome stuff about how to do this. So, Jason, how are you today?
Good. It's good to see you, Bronson.
Good to see you too. Really glad to have you on and just talk about these strategies on how to, that inflation can possibly be a good thing. So let's just jump right in. What are some ways that you're able to use inflation, or people can use inflation to their advantage?
Well, inflation, Bronson, is the hidden wealth creator with income property or real estate in general, but very specifically income property. And many years ago, I created something I call the ultimate investing equation. And part of it is using my inflation induced debt destruction technique that we'll talk about today. And I'll show some slides and visual aids that'll really help illustrate the point. But I do want to comment before that. Now that we are seeing some significant inflation rear its ugly head, and, inflation has always been manipulated and understated by the government. The powers that be have a very much a vested interest in misleading the public into believing the inflation rate is lower than it really is. So, first off, let's understand that, and we can talk about that. But also, there is this slew of crazy articles floating around now, and you may have seen some, and your listeners and viewers may have seen some too, that are trying to convince people of just this insane lie. It's just a total pathetic lie. And they're saying inflation is actually good for the poor. There is just zero truth to that. Zilch, nada,
Yeah.
nothing. It is such an epic lie. I don't know how anyone can write that or say that with a straight face. Inflation is really good for the middle, upper middle, and certainly the rich classes. Now, it's not good for all of the middle class. If they're doing the strategy we're going to talk about, it can be good for them. But yeah, so it is very good for people who use income property as their strategy, and that's what we should talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because again, there's kind of all this stuff being done, these handouts and these stimmy checks, and a lot of this stuff really given to the poor or middle class. And really, I mean, it actually hurts the people you're trying to help because if you don't own assets, you'll get destroyed, right? More, currency out there doesn't help unless you actually own assets. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about owning assets and your strategy, and just kind of get into the nuts and bolts of how it works.
Absolutely. So, I remember I was having a discussion maybe a month ago or so. And as you know, I own a mastermind group that I own with Ken McElroy and George Gammon. And Ken McElroy, of course, is their Rich Dad author. And I was telling him, Ken, I feel like I'm just long on everything in my portfolio. I'm long real estate, I'm long stocks, I'm long Bitcoin, I'm long gold, silver, platinum, palladium.
You
You
own it
know,
all.
I'm just long on everything.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, if there's a black swan event, or I don't know, am I missing something? I'm a little concerned, right? And then I thought about that conversation. He didn't answer me, but we hung up the phone, and I was thinking about that, and I thought, well, that is true that I'm long all those things, but several of those assets are actually shorting the dollar. And one particular thing that most people don't consider an asset is debt. And
Yeah.
my debt is an automatic way to short the dollar.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have any consumer debt. I don't believe in that. But I do believe in income property debt against properties that produce income, where you can delegate that debt to another party, and we call them tenants, right? They pay the
Mhm.
debts for us. And then they pay us a little extra every month. We call that positive cash flow. And it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it sounds like a great deal, right? They
Yeah.
get housing and we get equity, which is
It,
great.
it is a great deal. So just sharing my screen here, and I know that some people may not be viewing this, so I'll try to explain the visual aids so they can hear it just on audio if they're only listening. But since the creation of the Federal Reserve, we all know that the dollar has lost the vast majority of its value. In just over 100 years, the dollar's worth maybe 2 or 3% of what it was when the Federal Reserve was created, and the central bank and the government, they're of course in collusion, and they basically say publicly that their target inflation rate is 2%. Now, during the pandemic, Jerome Powell actually said, we're throwing that out the window. It's fine if inflation is higher. It's just transitory. It's not permanent. Don't you worry. Well, he might be right about that. That might not turn out to be a lie. But the problem is the medicine that you will have to take to stop inflation from being transitory is really bad medicine. And that's what Paul Volcker did in the early 80s when he was Federal Reserve Chair, by just massively constricting the money supply and hiking interest rates up to historically high levels. And that is very, very painful.
Yeah. I thought about that. I don't think we have anybody, there's not the political will to do that.
No.
And you're right. They're understating inflation to not deal with the issue. And we can get into, the inflation metrics and how it's measured, but you're right. I mean, so continue, please.
Yeah, absolutely. No, inflation is massively understated. It's manipulated down. It's fake news. It's a lie. But even if we go with the official rates of inflation, which we will in the example I'm about to show you, it's pretty good as a wealth creator if you're playing on the right side of the game here. So anyway, the dollar has just massively depreciated. Of course, how do we short the dollar? I think most people will agree that inflation is going to continue, even if it becomes more moderate, or maybe it becomes a lot worse. Maybe we even experience hyperinflation, which doesn't really have an academic definition. So there's no specific number that, everybody agrees on that is considered hyperinflation. But I think certainly real inflation right now, even though the government is telling us it's just over 6%, I think real inflation now is easily 13 to 15%. Now, everybody, of course, has their own personal inflation rate because we all spend a little bit differently. And it depends how we spend as to what the real rate of inflation is. But if we all can just agree that, look, inflation is the future, we might differ on the rate. It might be 2%, it might be 15%, it might be 25 or 50%. Who knows, right? But the future is inflationary, and the past has already been inflationary. So, we have a lot of reason to say that shorting the dollar would be a good idea, because if inflation devalues and debases the dollar, so the dollar is less valuable as inflation occurs, then let's short it, right? Because we know it's going down. It's like if you knew that a stock was going down in value for sure, would you short it? Well, of course you would, right? Because it's a sure win, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, no, it's great. I mean, I think it reminds me, George Gammon, our friend, talks about that when you have long-term debt, particularly in this environment, let's say you buy a house and you've got a 30-year mortgage on it at a fixed rate of 3%. Well, the debt really is the asset, right? Because over time, the asset over the next 30 years will appreciate. It'll have volatility, but it will appreciate, and the debt will be worth less. And inflation is already higher than 3%. So you're basically getting almost not free money, but you're getting, a substantial discount on getting the debt. And it's a different way to look at things. A lot of people say you shouldn't go into debt. Debt is bad, but this really is a debt system. And we're in a debt system now. And if you can take on debt, you should take on debt in a smart way, obviously not to pay consumer debt or credit cards, but if you can buy assets with debt at a low rate, a fixed rate, I don't really see any better investment than that.
Absolutely. I've been teaching that for a good 18 years now, that strategy. And that's actually how I met George. He was talking about me on his YouTube channel, and one of my clients was watching and said, hey, this guy keeps talking about you and your inflation stuff. He started listening to you in 2012. You should reach out to him and, get to know him. And so
Yeah,
the rest is kind of history there.
that's awesome.
But yeah, absolutely, that is absolutely true. Money became debt in 1971 when Nixon broke the final tie to the gold standard, and the game completely changed then. So the strategy is inflation-induced debt destruction. I know it's a mouthful.
Mhm.
Say it 3 times fast.
Let's call it IIDD, just
Yeah,
for short, right?
you could go IIDD for short, absolutely. So we want to destroy our debt with inflation. So the powers, the people in power now, Janet Yellen, Joe Biden, they are spending money like crazy. I remember Reagan's great saying years ago. He said and this was back in a time when the government spent a lot less. He used to say that the government spends money like a drunken sailor is an insult to drunken sailors.
That's true. Very
So,
inefficient.
yeah. And all of this spending, as I'm sure most of your viewers and listeners know, all of this spending creates inflationary pressure. And so it looks like it's going to get a lot worse. Now, keep in mind, it's not just that pressure doesn't only come from the deficit and the debt that we owe now, which is very high. But it also comes from the future obligations, the unfunded mandates, the unfunded entitlements, the promises the government has made that it will have to keep over the next 10 to 15 years. And I've had Lawrence Kutlikoff, the economist, on my podcast several times, and he's done some really deep studies into this. And he says, and by the way, this is pre-pandemic. I got to get him back on to talk about post-pandemic, what this looks like. But pre-pandemic, he says that the obligations are about 220 trillion, that's with a T,
Wow.
$220 trillion over the next 10 years or so. So think about that for a moment. Think about
Mhm.
how significant this is. The GDP, the entire value the entire country produces every year is only about $20 trillion.
Hmm.
Okay. And if we have a very large debt to GDP ratio currently, which we do, and we're running deficits on an ongoing basis, and we're continuing to make new promises that don't even count here because every politician always just gives away more goodies. That's all they know how to do. Okay. If everything was paused, snapshot like it is today, and everybody was taxed at 100%, and understand that that GDP number of 20 trillion, it also includes government projects like the infrastructure bill. So that's not even something that is really real productivity. Okay. It's,
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
not, it's not me selling something to you and you buying it from me, or us, exporting something to another country. That's real value in the economy, right? So it's just crazy how bad this problem is. But just on that 20 trillion to 220 trillion relationship, it means if you just took the entire GDP of the country, it would take 11 years to pay for the promises we've made if we never make another promise after today.
Hmm.
it's
It's insane, right?
it's absolutely insane.
It is. It's really staggering. And it just goes to, the irresponsibility of really government. I don't know what else
Yeah.
to say, but it seems like the answer to everything these days is to just spend more money. Oh, we're going to do this. We've got this program. We've got this thing, and there's no accountability. And it's just this thought of the MMT, the modern monetary theory that,
Yeah.
we don't have inflation. And as long as we deny it or we don't acknowledge it or we just, really don't see it, or supposedly that we can control it. And it's just, we've seen that over the last 5,000 years. You cannot control it. It happens in
Yeah.
every empire, and they fall. And so things are changing, and people don't realize that things are significantly changing. A lot of people think it's just going to return to life as normal. Well, there is no normal. There's going to be
No.
a very new normal, and it's going to be very, very different than the one that we came from,
Yeah.
even just a few years ago.
It is. It's a whole new world, and there are opportunities and there are crises, and most people, sadly, will get hurt by all of this. But a few that get it, that are listening, they can benefit by it if they reposition things. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So I've identified 6 ways the government has to get out of the mess it's in. The government is definitely in a mess, and it's not just the US government, it's pretty much every government around the world, okay? In fact, the US has huge advantages that other countries don't have because it has the reserve currency, the military to keep it that way, et cetera, et cetera. So the US is actually in a much better position than the rest of the world, okay? So one way the government could get out of the problem is it could just simply default. It could say, look, I realize we've made all these promises to people. We promised you, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, welfare programs, foreign aid, blah, blah, blah. The list is endless. We don't have the money. We can't keep the promise, so we have to institute austerity measures. And you see what happens when austerity measures are instituted. We saw what happened in Greece, Spain. It's all over the world. It's happening, and there are riots in the streets, and it is really ugly. This is politically unpopular. It's unlikely that the government will do an outright default. But what they will do is a slow default, and I'll explain that in a moment. They could raise taxes, right? Well, we just discussed this. If you took everybody, the entire GDP of the entire country, and taxed everybody at 100%, which is effectively slavery, effectively slavery, right? If you tax them at 100% and said, go out, work hard, earn all your money, and give it to us, and you have nothing left for yourself, right?
A lot of motivation there, right?
No, it obviously would be a disaster. Communism doesn't work, okay? And even under communist governments, they do pay people, right? But this isn't possible, right? And it wouldn't even solve the problem if it was possible. It would take 11 years just to pay for the promises we've already made now, right? So it's just not going to work. We could have a yard sale. The U.S. could sell off some of its assets. It could sell the ports to Dubai. Remember when that was in the news about 10 years ago or so? And it didn't happen. We could sell military equipment, our high-tech military equipment, to countries that maybe we shouldn't be selling it to, which we've definitely done. And that's a huge mistake, but we do it. The Bureau of Land Management sells off land to real estate developers and so forth. There are toll roads in the US that are owned by foreign governments or foreign companies, in China, for example. So, there are things we could do here, right? I mean, look, one of our states, or well, really all of it, well, not all of it, but a lot of the country was assembled through business deals, right? The Louisiana Purchase, Alaska, right? So, we bought Alaska, right? It was a purchase. It was a deal. So we could sell off assets too, right? That's a possibility. Problem is, other countries are in the same mess and they can't afford to buy. Who's the buyer, right?
Right. So, and it probably really wouldn't raise that much money. I mean, maybe you'd raise a few $100 billion or something, but you wouldn't really be able to raise enough.
It would be a temporary fix.
Right.
And without real fiscal discipline, it's never going to solve the problem on a long-term basis. We could use our military might and our military machine to basically steal the assets of other countries. And people might say, well, no, we're too decent. We would never do that. Well, that's the map of the world, folks. That's how the map was created, by countries invading one another and stealing their assets. That's the history of the human race right there, okay? On the good side, I know all of these have been pretty negative, but on the good side, there could be some great technological innovation that just makes the country or the entire world prosperous. And that would be wonderful. We'll see if there's some nanotechnology breakthrough, energy breakthrough, biotech, nanotechnology breakthrough, whatever, that could happen. That'd be great. But the most likely thing is we will simply inflate our way out of the problem. And we will debase the value of our currency on purpose so that we pay the debt back in cheaper dollars. So think about this. If the US owes $1 trillion to China, for example, right? If inflation is 10%, and that inflation might take place in 6 months, 10%, or 1 year, or 3 years, it doesn't matter. Just say 10% inflation occurs. Time frame irrelevant. Then the US basically just got a $100 billion discount, or a 10% discount on that debt. It just evaporated, poof, magic, right? So This is a good business plan for the US, for its central bank, for other countries and their central banks. And it's the plan they've been executing, and the plan they're going to continue executing, is what I say. And we should execute the same plan. I'm a practical person in many ways. I think you can sit around and argue about the philosophical nature of how bad this is, what they're doing. It's wrong. I agree completely, but it's not going to do any good. We don't have the power to change it. So we should simply, Bronson, align our interest with the most powerful forces the human race has ever known: governments and central banks, with standing armies, with police forces. We should align our interest with theirs and do the same thing they're doing. And we can become very, very wealthy doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really true. The Fed has painted themselves into a corner, and it happens, historically. Look at history. This happens to big, great empires, is that they just go through spending and continue to spend. And then, we have all these with central banking. You don't have to pay for wars anymore. You have to pay for anything you need, and it's just simply an IOU.
Yeah.
And then it gets to a point where, the buck does come due. And I think what you said is absolutely true. And that's, hopefully when we talk about inflation, it is more of a gradual inflation where it's 10% or 12 or 15, whatever. But if it gets to
well,
be
most people would consider 10% an absolute disaster.
It'd be a disaster, exactly. Yeah, because for every $100,000 you have in the bank, you're losing. It could be now you're losing over $10,000 or $15,000 per year. But there are companies. I think hyperinflation is defined by the IMF of being something like 50% per month
annually,
or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
It's very 50% per month, I believe. So
Right.
It's very high, but. Losing the value of the currency, it's a lot of people don't really have a grasp for it. And it's hard to think outside of the dollar. And that's really what you're talking about, is that, wealth is not currency. The dollars are not money, right? And so, if you can find a way to get into assets by using this kind of funny money or debt, it allows you to really take advantage of it. So, so talk to us about kind of, just the next steps on how people can do that.
Well, most people think that this is the solution. And that's a Bitcoin I'm holding up, okay? If you can't see it, they think this is the solution, or they think the color it is, gold, is the solution, right? And these are relatively weak asset choices. They're okay, maybe as insurance policy, but the big thing to do is to use inflation-induced debt destruction. So these that I'm holding up, these are Zimbabwe dollars, okay? And they're basically worthless. They're just sort of souvenirs and trinkets now. This is 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars right there.
I have one of those as well on my shelf in the other room.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
One of my listeners sent these to me years ago, and you can buy them on Amazon or eBay, right? And they're basically souvenirs, but it just shows you, one Zimbabwe dollar used to have real value. And then when they inflated their currency out of existence, even 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars had very little value. And so understand, let's just look at the screen here and let's learn something about monetary policy, okay? So to understand inflation, we need to distinguish the difference between real and nominal. Nominal means the name of something. That's all it means. What is the name of it? That's nominal, is in name only. So a dollar is still called a dollar, even though it was also called a dollar in 1971 when Nixon made it unconvertible to gold, okay? The name hasn't changed, but the value has declined, right? The value is not the same as the name. And understand that inflation is this insidious hidden tax that destroys purchasing power. It destroys the value of savings, stocks, bonds, and even equity in real estate. Why? Because all those things are denominated in dollars. And thankfully, debt is also denominated in dollars. So it destroys the value of debt. And I'm going to give you a real example of that happened to millions and millions of people. And you're going to see how this works. Not a theory, reality, okay? So it destroys the value of debt, and it's the most powerful method of wealth redistribution. I had Joe the plumber on my podcast, You might remember that name from 2008 when he walked up to Obama when Obama was running for president and said, Obama, you're going to redistribute my wealth. And he didn't like it. And that just somehow became a meme in the media, right? And what Joe the plumber was referring to was taxation. And taxation is a way to redistribute wealth. You know, we got to tax the evil rich and give it to the poor, right? This Robin Hood idea. But taxation is actually a very inefficient way to redistribute wealth. The best way, the most efficient way is through inflation because it's subtle, it's hidden, and most people just don't understand it. They just don't understand that it's happening. And so inflation redistributes wealth from lenders to borrowers. Why? Because if I'm, and I am, by the way, a hard money lender, I loan money on real estate deals short term. I would not want to be a long term lender because inflation would really devastate my wealth. Okay, so think about this. If I loan you $100,000 for a house that you want to do a fix and flip on, I'm going to give you that $100,000 valued on today's dollars. Today it's worth $100,000 because no time has passed, no inflation has happened yet. But if I loan it for 1 year and there's 6.2% inflation, like the government actually has admitted to, but the real inflation rate's about 13 to 15%, if you ask me, then you might pay 6% interest on that money, but you're going to pay me back $94,000 in real dollars after the official inflation rate, but the check you're going to write me is going to say $106,000. So how much did I make? Well, nothing, zero. My return on investment of lending that money was zero, and you borrowed it for zero, right? Because inflation destroyed the value of the principal of that loan. It also transfers wealth from old people to young people. Why? Well, it does this because mostly and hopefully old people have assets. They have savings, stocks, and bonds, and this is denominated in dollars. And mostly young people have debts, and that's denominated in dollars. So if inflation attacks both dollar-denominated things, then it is going to move the wealth from the old people to the young people and pay off the young people's debt. So it's an intergenerational wealth transfer without an inheritance. No one died here, okay? So there was a transfer of wealth from old to young while everybody's still alive, okay? It's absolutely amazing way to transfer wealth. And this is something I noticed back when I was living where you live in the Socialist Republic of California.
I wish I could get out, but I'm here for now. And,
hey, listen, I felt that way for many years, buddy. I was, I was the same way. But, there are things you can do to protect yourself as much as you can. And we're talking about one of them today, okay? But I noticed when the government is broke, it becomes predatory against its citizens, because it's trying to raise money, give out more speeding tickets, give out more DUIs, whatever you can do to raise money, raise these little taxes that people don't really notice, raise the car registration fee, raise this, raise that, And so the government is just desperate to raise money anywhere they can. And that's certainly true in places like New York, California, but broader in the United States in general, okay? Yeah. It's just a thing that happens. So here's the real life example. Let's look at Bronson at someone who bought a house in 1972, 1 year after we went off the gold standard. And the median price house back then was about $18,000. And let's say they put down 20%. So they borrowed just over $14,000. Now in 1972, a dollar was worth a dollar because no time had passed, no inflation had occurred yet. And by 1984, that same dollar was only worth 40 cents. So it lost 60% of its value in 12 years. And I use 1984 because that's a subliminal message to say, read the book by George Orwell. Okay? Yeah. Sadly, that book has become true. We're living it right now. It didn't quite happen by 1984, but it's happening today. So read that book. Very important, very short, easy book to read. know what that's about, because back in 1949, I think, when he wrote it, he predicted the future and he was right. By 2001, the last year to pay that mortgage, the dollar was only worth 24 cents. So all this inflation occurred over 30 years. Now, this was an owner-occupied house, not an investment property, not a rental property. This is a house where someone lived in it. Let's see what happened to them. When they borrowed that money, they signed a mortgage at 7.37%, because that was the interest rate on a mortgage for 30 years in 1972, 7.37. After inflation devalued that mortgage, that loan, denominated in dollars, and the dollar went down in value, so the real obligation of that debt went down in value too, in a good way for the borrower and a bad way for the lender. Their real rate on the interest was only 1.06%. Now understand, this is based on the official or reported rate of inflation, according to the Consumer Price Index, which is highly manipulated, and it is fake news. The Consumer Price Index is basically manipulated down to make inflation look lower than it really is in three basic ways. Waiting, sorry, I didn't know which one I was going to say in which order here. Senior moment here. I'm having a Biden moment. Waiting, substitution, and hedonic indexing. Okay. Weighting, substitution, and hedonic indexing. Let's take weighting. The Consumer Price Index is a basket of goods. And Bronson, I know you know all this stuff. You understand this stuff very well, but your listeners maybe don't know. So there's this basket of goods, and there are items in the basket of goods. Well, when the inflation rate starts to look too high, they adjust the weighting of those items. So they assume you'll spend a little less on this thing that went way up in price, and you'll spend a little more on something that didn't go up too much. So it makes the inflation rate look lower. Substitution. And this is happening all over the board right now. We've seen a lot of examples of this recently. For example, the price of beef goes up, and they just assume that everyone, because the price of beef went up, they'll just switch to chicken. And maybe you don't like chicken. Maybe you think chicken's a dirty bird. So you don't want to eat chicken, you want to eat beef, right? But they'll just assume the switch to manipulate the inflation rate down. Hedonic indexing basically says, okay, how much pleasure, hedonism, do you get? Hedonism is pleasure seeking, so hedonic indexing is how much pleasure do you get out of an item. So if I hold up this smartphone, right? This phone cost me $1,500. Well, my first phone cost $3,200, and it weighed 14 pounds. Okay, and it didn't do anything but make phone calls. And this phone is a computer. It does way, way more than that first phone did, and it's much more portable, fits in my back pocket. So they will assume that because you're getting so much pleasure out of this new item that is a higher tech item, we're going to assume you actually paid less for that than you really did through hedonic indexing or hedonic adjustments. And
yeah,
so,
I want to stop you for one second, Jason.
Yeah.
This is all really good, and I think it's really it's another way the government can lie to us about inflation, and that they're so incentivized to do that. And I mean, everything you're saying is 100% true. And I'd say 95% of people, 98% of people have no idea this is happening, and they just wonder why things are costing more at the pump, and it's all temporary. Well, I think that's going to change here soon. I know we're going a little longer on our episode here, but I know this is stuff I love talking about, because I think this is really the stuff that everybody needs. If you don't understand this stuff, this is like, this stuff will make you really wealthy or make you really poor, whether you understand this or not. So I love that you're sharing this.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So I'll wrap up here in a moment with how do we use this, right? How do we use this? So after inflation, they're really only paying 1.06% when they thought they were paying 7.37%. Okay, this is the millions of people who got a 30-year mortgage in the early 70s. Okay, so after tax benefits, because remember, the interest on that mortgage is tax deductible. Now, I know everybody's tax rate's a little different. This is just an example. They're actually getting paid to borrow the money. They got paid 1.16%. They were paying negative interest over 30 years. So they lived in the house for free, got paid to live there 1.16% based on the official inflation rate, which was much lower than the real inflation rate. If you calculated this on the real inflation rate, all of this looks even better for the borrower, okay? Because they're using inflation-induced debt destruction. So here's a summary of it. They borrowed just over $14,000. They repaid in nominal dollars with 7.37% interest over $36,000. And they all thought, well, hey, we ought to figure out how to pay our mortgage off early. No, don't do that. Okay, don't pay it off.
That's one of the worst things you could do is pay it off early. Just use that debt as long as you can.
Use it as long as you can, as long as it's fixed rate and as long as it's cheap debt. Okay, and it is in this example. And today it's even cheaper. In real dollars after inflation, they only repaid just over $16,000, but they borrowed $14,000. Okay, so they were really only paying 1.06% interest, but after tax benefits on the interest being tax deductible, they borrowed $14,600, but they only repaid $12,600. You mean they repaid less than they borrowed in real dollars? Yes, amazing. Absolutely. Yeah. They got paid 1.16% to borrow the money. They got paid to live there. Okay, so that's inflation-induced debt destruction in a nutshell. Thoughts, questions? What did I miss that we should just wrap up?
I think it's really, and if you're not watching this via video, I think it's really helpful to see the video. So if you're just listening to this, maybe go check out the video on YouTube. But it really shows that over time, having large amounts of debt can be a really good thing if it's at a low rate and it's fixed. And it's actually, this gets me rethinking. I have all my assets in, typically multifamily, do these big multifamily deals, mostly in kind of your area in Florida and Georgia and Texas. And we have, longer term debt, but it's not 30-year debt. Typically it's right. 5-year debt or 10-year debt.
Yeah. That's the problem with commercial real estate. You don't get these 30-year fixed rate. You can get fixed for like 10 years on a commercial deal, usually, 7 to 10 years maybe is the most you can get. And then it goes adjustable. On the residential, it's more subsidized by the government because these, non-government sponsored entities like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, after the Great Depression, there was this just big move to subsidize and encourage housing. And they sort of forgot or didn't really think much about how investors would take advantage of what is essentially a government welfare program for investors. So take advantage of it. You pay taxes, get your welfare. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. And I see there's a couple ways you can do this. I actually, did single family for a number of years, and there's parts of it I really enjoy. I know this is your business, and I some of the management of it I didn't enjoy as much. But I also think for me too, like at a place, if you live in a high cost place, the average house in the area I live in is about 1.2 million, and just seeing it could even make sense to buy in an area like this where if you can get that low rate, even if there is a single family crash or some sort of short-term event, the long-term trend is inflationary. And that's really what you're bringing up, is that the strategy is to just take on as much long-term fixed debt as you can. So obviously one way is to buy investment properties, investment houses. That's your business. Another way is to, obviously the residence that you live in, or you can house hack or do different things. What are some other ways people can use long-term debt or get long-term debt to be able to invest?
Well, the single family homes are the most debt favored asset class in America. So you can't beat that. The second best thing is going to be multifamily, like you specialize in. And listen, I've owned a couple of good size apartment buildings myself, and those get really good debt as well. Not quite as good as the single family, but you can do it at a bigger scale more easily. So I completely understand why people are attracted to that. But that's really about it. What this does, remember, this is self-liquidating debt. Self-liquidating debt. Just remember that phrase, self-liquidating debt, because we don't pay our own debts. The tenant pays the debts. Right. Okay. So that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And it's similar to what, in the 1980s, the corporate raiders became well known and famous. You know, you heard a lot about Ivan Boesky and T. Boone Pickens and Carl Icahn and you know, all of the stuff they were doing. And there were, you know, movies made about it, like Wall Street, et cetera, right? And what they do, one of their big strategies is called the LBO, the leveraged buyout.
Hmm.
And this is essentially what I'm suggesting people watching and listening do. You know, like they can invest through my company. You can find out more at jasonhartman.com, just my name, jasonhartman.com. And we help people buy mostly single family homes all over the country in different markets that we like and recommend. And so they think about what they do there. They go buy a house, they put 20% down on the house, they get the bank to put in 80% of the money, so they're only putting in 1/5 of it, and then they sign loan documents to take on the debt to get the mortgage for the 80%. And then they say, well, you know, I don't really want to pay the debt. That's boring. I'm going to delegate that responsibility to the tenant and tell them to pay the debt. Essentially, that's what they do, right? And then they pay a little extra every month called positive cash flow. So it gets even better. And then you get these incredible tax write offs because it's the most tax favored asset class in America, when the single largest expense any of us have is taxes. So
Right.
it's just an incredible asset class. You can't really do it with anything else as effectively as you can with income property, because income property just has these very special characteristics, and it's subsidized by the government.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. And what we do, you know, Mailbox Money, we talk about different forms of passive investing or getting involved in different sorts of asset classes. And I think it doesn't really matter what it is. You know, our business is large multifamily. We do, you know, very large properties, and you know, it is you know, a little more passive than being in the
Yep.
single family. But there are great managers out there, and some people like having a greater degree of control. And so I think it's really important, whatever you invest in, whatever asset it is, you have to look at the characteristics, because it doesn't matter. You know, I mean, I think you and I, Jason, we're in real estate, not because necessarily real estate is the best thing in the world ever, but it's because of the benefits and what it actually gives you. And a lot of people don't understand the investment profile of, and maybe you know, you're a guy, you love real estate regardless because it's physical and it's real.
Well, no, it
Um,
is the best thing ever. I
Great,
mean, there's
yeah.
nothing better
There's
than
nothing
it. If
else.
there was something better, I would just do that instead. Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
look,
No, it
look,
is.
if stocks were better, I would be talking about stocks right now. Okay. They're just
Yeah,
not. They just don't have the multidimensional characteristics of income property. It's a very special asset class. You
yeah.
know, on most asset classes, there are either one or two dimensional assets. You know, precious metals. The whole strategy: buy some gold, right? Buy low, sell high. That's it. That's the whole strategy. There's nothing else to it. Okay. Bitcoin: buy low, sell high. Now I know, listen, I own some Bitcoin too, folks. I understand crypto deeply. I have a podcast called the Crypto Cast that I host. Okay. I
Nice.
get it. I know there's creative stuff you can do with crypto assets and even creative stuff you can do with gold, but it's not mainstream. I mean, for most people, the strategy is buy low, sell high. That's about it, right? And the other strategies become much more, you're going farther down the risk curve if you use them. Okay. With single family homes, it doesn't become more risky as you get these multidimensional characteristics. It becomes safer, actually, right? Because your lender becomes your partner, and they're at risk and at stake like you are. It becomes lower risk when you use debt on real estate, whereas with other assets, it becomes higher risk. And then, you know, you could have stocks: buy low, sell high. If it pays dividends, okay, buy low, sell high, get some dividends in between. There's no tax benefits. In fact, most of these asset classes have terrible tax treatment. Gold, for example, is taxed as a collectible. Like, I'll be with you in a second. Uh, and so that has got a terrible tax treatment, whereas income property has a fantastic tax treatment. So really just a very special asset class.
Yeah, well, Jason, I know we could talk about this all day, and I just wanted to say, you know, thank you for coming on and talking about this. I know I've benefited. I know everybody listening has benefited. I've been, you know,
I'll be
I
right
didn't
there.
share this on this show, but you know, for over 10 years, 10 years ago, I started listening to some of your podcasting, and I know you said something like 34 different podcasts now or shows that you're doing, which is really incredible. So I just want to honor you for really adding so much to the to investors, to the space of understanding not only inflation, but investing, and appreciate all the stuff that you bring. So it's been great to collaborate on some events and everything, but can you maybe just one more time tell people how they can reach out to you or anything that you're working on you wanted to share?
Yep. JasonHartman.com is my main website, just my name, JasonHartman.com. And also, I have a free book for your listeners at pandemicinvesting.com. I know, can't believe I got that domain name, huh?
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure you've had some offers on that.
Yeah, pandemicinvesting.com. There's a free book, no strings attached. You get the book right away. And it just adapts some of my strategies for the crazy world in which we're living nowadays. And just check me out there. And we're happy to help you build a great investment portfolio or just with some strategies and free consultation. So a lot more there. And my podcast and YouTube channel, of course, is available to everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Well, I appreciate you. I look forward to having you on again sometime soon.
Thank you, Bronson. Happy investing.
All right. So using inflation to your advantage. I hope this was eye-opening for you. It definitely was for me. Once I really understood how inflation really works, I realized you can actually get behind actually taking out more debt in a good way, in a wise way, fixed long-term debt to buy assets. It's really how long-term mortgages work, right? People buy long-term mortgages for a single-family house, and over time, I think we're going to see as inflation rises, having that 3% debt or having really low debt on a house, even if you pay a little more for the asset, over time, it's because they're printing so much more money. And we've talked about this a lot, that 40% of all the currency that exists was created in the last 18 months, at least at the time of this recording, the end of 2021. So it's something, just as you look at your investments and as you look at what you own, I thought that was interesting what Jason said about even crypto and gold being inferior assets because you're not really able to leverage them for debt. There's not benefits as far as the tax treatment, but there is an interest. The government is very interested in keeping homeowners in their homes, giving them favorable terms, subsidizing loans. And so there's a lot of creative things out there to be able to get into it. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Feel free to shoot me an email or just reach out. Love to connect with people one-on-one. Some things that we're working on over here is we're working on some different alternative assets that are beyond real estate. There's things like ATM machine funds and other sorts of things that we're working on to try to help people get great returns, take advantage of tax advantages and depreciation. So anyway, I hope you got some quite a bit of value out of this. And you continue to educate yourself, continue to learn more, continue to network, continue to find new things that are out there, new perspectives, even things that you may initially disagree with, because even though you may get offended, it may be something that you actually really need to hear, and it may be something that could really help you. So thanks for educating yourself. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
You've been listening to the Mailbox Money Podcast. For more free resources, articles, and videos, go to bronsonequity.com. There you can download your copy of the special report, The Single Best Investment Strategy During and After a Pandemic. None of the information shared here is an offer to buy a specific investment, and this is for educational purposes only. Consult your financial, legal, and tax professionals and use your own common sense before making any investment decisions. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time for more Mailbox Money.